Good evening, everybody. It's great to see you all. Thanks for coming out on a beautiful summer night to think about the future of learning, the future of education, which I like to say is the answer to everything. No matter what the news is about and the problems that you hear about in our society, whether it's national security or our economy or jobs, healthcare, it all comes down to a better educational system, doesn't it? It all comes down to learning and educating ourselves, and in education, the earlier the better, about these issues and how can we create a better community and, in fact, a better democracy. I'm so pleased to be here. Thank you to the San Diego Foundation, to the Center for Civic Engagement, because it is all about civic engagement. What I'll talk to you about tonight is about the entire community coming together to support its young people. The future of learning is not just up to the schools. We used to think about education as just about schools, but in fact, if you look at the school day and the school year, we have a very short school year compared to other countries, which go on about 200 days a year. Our school year is, and some of you from the San Diego area districts can confirm this, about 180 days. Many nations have another month of learning for their kids. So that long summer vacation, you know why it's there. It goes back 100 years to when we were a more agrarian society. And it was for the kids to help bring in the crops. So I hope your kids are doing that, because that's why they have the long summer vacation. You know, starting in about 4 weeks, they should be harvesting the crops and bring them in before school starts in September. So I like to say that now kids should be harvesting ideas. They should be harvesting learning, and that the summer offers a real opportunity for this. I like to call the summer the third semester. I've seen programs where kids learn more during 6 weeks or 8 weeks during the summer than they did the previous semester in school. They're out in nature, they're in places like Children's Museum, they're in public libraries, they're learning things and getting experiences that can really propel their learning. Just a quick word about myself. Sometimes people have asked me, how did you get interested in this? And oh my God, 4 decades? Are you that old? What happened was I was in college. I went to Harvard College and met a professor who was an advisor to Sesame Street. And I started working in the research department of Sesame Street when I was 19. My first job out of college was at Sesame Workshop. A couple years later, 1982, we're producing this program called Big Bird in China. That is the production crew on the Great Wall of China. Do you see me there? My hair's a little longer, actually, 30 plus years ago, but this is the experience that propelled me to think about educational innovation, the fact that we could use media and technology, old technology, television 30 years ago. Sesame Street is turning 46, I believe, this fall. So it's one of the most successful innovations in education. The fact that we could make it more joyful, that kids would want to learn. Can we do more of that? We could use Muppets and animation and music and humor. Humor just not only for the kids, but also for their parents. That was my experience. I sometimes say my learning journey has taken me from the longest street in the world. There are versions of Sesame Street around the world now, in Asia, in the Arabic version, Iftaya Sim Sim, in the Arabic nations, Zhimajie, Sesame Street in China. Longest street in the world to a galaxy long ago and far, far away. TED Talks, of course. Love TED Talks. You can learn so much in 14 minutes, can't you? Here's a great TED Talk. Clay Shirky, a futurist at NYU, says that we are living in the age of the greatest expansion of human creativity ever in the history of humankind. Think about that. We are living in this age where people are expressing through every medium what they know. And that can be as true for our young people and our students as it is for you. Clay Shirky says, if you think about it on your smartphone, every medium we've ever invented for capturing, storing, presenting, expressing knowledge, every medium, the book, the newspaper, music, video, photography, every medium is right next to every other medium right here on this device. And it's now at a price point where we can now talk about giving every kid in San Diego, every kid in California and in the nation, access to what is now available on the internet. The reason this is here is that I used to track a statistic. How long does it take for an entire day's worth of video to be uploaded to YouTube? It used to take 5 minutes. I used to say, in just 5 minutes, people from around the world are uploading video of their experiences to YouTube. And now it's less than 1 minute. People have also said, well, you know, not everything on YouTube is educational, and that's true. But here's one of my favorite educational videos. Did you know you can train your cat to use the toilet? I would get another cat now that I know that. Sometimes people ask me, how did George Lucas get interested in education? And I refer them to this website, the Academy of Achievement, achievement.org. I won't say much more about Mr. Lucas's interest in education. We were talking earlier that it's sometimes said that the United States actually has one of the most forgiving educational systems in the world. You know, in other countries, if you take that test in China, that pretty much determines your life's path, doesn't it? If you don't do well in high school, if you don't do well in college, if you drop off, there's still a way in which you can come back and do some amazing work. And Mr. Lucas, imagine if you were a teacher of him in high school in Modesto, California. He's a quiet young man in the back of the room. He's getting a C in your class, maybe a D. And if you asked him before high school graduation, George Lucas, what do you want to be when you grow up? He would have said, probably a car mechanic. I like cars. I like fixing cars. I have my own car. I want to be a race car driver, but that's really hard, so I'll probably be a car mechanic. Through this Academy of Achievement, you'll see his path to becoming a filmmaker. You'll see, he says, I was a terrible student in high school. Mr. Lucas, one of the most distinguished graduates of our California community college system, Modesto JC, the only college he could get into with his grades. Most people pick up his story at USC after he went there. So, yeah. A friend of his was going to USC. I'll just say this quickly. A friend of his is going to USC and says, George, why don't you come with? You're interested in photography. The inkling of who he is today was he did have a darkroom at home. For the young people, a darkroom is a very dark room where we used to develop photographs. It was very messy and expensive, and it took forever. You wouldn't believe it. But back when this fellow was in high school, he had a darkroom. So he went to his father, George Lucas Sr., said, can I go to USC with my buddy? And Mr. Lucas Sr. said, George, you're my only son. I want you to come back and run the family business, a stationery store, office furniture store in Modesto. But his father said, I think it's good that you finish your college. There's no way you will make a living as a photographer. But yeah, go and finish at USC and then come back and run the family business. And George said when he got to USC, that's when the blinders fell off. It was the first time that he was doing something that he loved so much. He thought about going to take a course in photography. He said to his friend, can you really take a course in that? That would be like taking a course in recess. That would be so much fun. Can you do that? When he got there was no photography department, just a little cinema school, nothing like it is today, a little cinema department. He said it was the first time he saw a foreign film, the first time he was good at something. He liked to use his hands to fix cars. He liked to use his hands with filmmaking equipment. So most people pick up his story there, but believe me, until the age of 20, 21, George Lucas was the quiet student in the back, not getting a great grade. So we said, what can I do to help the millions of kids out there like me? They're still out there. They're sitting in the back of class. They're not engaged. And educators told him, if you're a filmmaker. If you could make some films about these innovative classrooms. We're not very good in education about sharing information about innovation. When we hear about something, we might go and visit it, but it's doing something so different, we don't really welcome it back into the system. So this is Edutopiaorg, a more ideal learning environment. That's what we're all about. That's our website. And there are films there, and I'll show you a couple of them on slides, and maybe if I have a chance, I'll show you one more. Getting about 1 million visitors now. Thanks. Some of you may have heard our underwriting on NPR. Support for NPR is provided by the George Lucas Educational Foundation, producers of Edutopiaorg, What Works in Education. We have covered a number of stories from San Diego. And again, I wish I had more time, but one of the very first stories we covered was from the Chula Vista School District 18 years ago. If you search on Edutopia, and that's a great thing, you can do it right now on your, search on Edutopia and Chula Vista. You will see a project where kids, not far from here, in 4th grade, collected insects and then saw their insects under a scanning electron microscope over a fiber optic connection with entomologists at San Diego State University. It was amazing and expensive. But now any kid can do that, right? Video conferencing has gotten so inexpensive, and believe it or not, the National Science Foundation heard about that project and said, we will provide a grant to the University of Illinois to do this for every kid through the internet. It's called BugScope. If you go to bugscope.org, you'll see this project where kids can collect insects, look at them, send them, and talk with scientists. Even better if they talk with undergraduates and graduate students in entomology. Young people are just 10, 15 years older than they are who just love bugs. High Tech High, of course, I think many of you are familiar with. I'm sure it's gotten a lot of attention here locally. But just to say, you guys have a great ecosystem for the future of learning. You have so many assets to build upon, and this is an example, a children's museum, a public library can be a great asset in this new learning ecosystem, in this new landscape of learning, a foundation that brings you together to talk about what you can all do together. Those are the active ingredients of this new future learning landscape. We were talking about Quinn earlier. Here's a young man. He's 13 in this film that we made about him. He's showing you an iPhone case with his name carved in it. 3 years ago when he was 10, he went to the Maker Faire in San Mateo. He was born into the right family because his parents took him there in the spring. He got so excited about these sort of devices and the maker movement you've seen out here. He is now teaching his peers and teaching his school district how to incorporate making into the curriculum. To their credit, his school district on the Central Coast of California said, we've heard about you. We'd like to learn more about this. And he gave a presentation to their school board and to their superintendent. So we've made a film about that, and you can see it. We've made a number of films in partnership with the Pearson Foundation that show you classrooms from around the world. So much talk about Finland, so much talk about Singapore. They're at the top of the international comparisons. What they don't have are places like this, children's museums, a network of public libraries, great universities. Again, you have all the active ingredients to make this work for your children. I hope there's no one here from Finland or Singapore, because the one great thing that they have is, first of all, they're smaller, but they have great leadership. And if the Minister of Education understands what it takes to provide out-of-school learning, summer learning, technology, they will make sure that every kid in their country does that, and soon. They're moving more quickly when they understand what it takes. And believe me, they have come here. I wouldn't be surprised if they came to San Diego, to UCSD, to High Tech High, and studied the best examples. They often say this in their talks, the best examples of what the US is doing, and they bring that back to their country. I like this image because in some of these countries, imagine the conversation among their national politicians and leaders. We've got a chance to create new currency. What images should we put on our currency to project our values, our culture? And in Taiwan and in Singapore, on their currency, images of children learning. Look at the images on our currency. I hope we get a chance to have this conversation. I wrote this book about leading edges of innovation, 6 leading edges of innovation, based essentially on our work at Edutopia.org. Here are the edges. We can now talk about not just learning anytime, any place. You're familiar with that. You know that you carry these devices. You can get information anytime, anywhere you are. But what about a more flexible learning landscape where kids can take different paths, any path, and maybe vary the time it takes? For kids who can learn a certain topic, a certain concept quickly, they can move ahead more quickly. If they need more time, they can slow down the pace. But any path, any pace. So these edges, I think you can understand what they're about. New forms of curriculum and assessment, very important to change the assessment, because what gets tested is what gets taught. So we need to change the assessments. Technology, of course, at a price point now where every kid can have their own device. Varying learning time and place. I've talked about the summer as a third semester for learning. Co-teaching and co-learning. That young boy, Quinn, he's teaching. He's teaching his teachers and he's teaching his peers, but he's also learning. In this new learning landscape, we should all think of ourselves as teachers and as learners. Youth, of course, perhaps the most important edge, the largest edge of innovation, what young people can now do and learn things earlier. But it's the thinking edge. The thinking edge is the most important edge, changing our thinking about what this is about. I'm giving you a lecture. This is a very typical, traditional form of instruction. But if we had more time, we'd do more of a workshop, and you would get a chance to form teams and talk about what you can do to support this new learning landscape in San Diego. We'd talk about what are your interests, what are your passions, what would you like to be part of. There would be choice. There would be a chance for you to express how you'd like to be part of this new learning landscape. Here's our strength. I'm glad no one's here from Finland or Singapore, because we are blending the formal in-school academic part and making it more flexible and more creative through a variety of out-of-school experiences, through places like where we are today. The role of media, getting kids more exposure to the workplace. I'll talk a little bit about that. It's so important to break down the artificial barrier between school and work. Just a few statistics, and these are student enrollment percentages from 2 years ago, all by way of saying that think about this. Not just are we living in the age of the greatest expansion of human capability, but here in San Diego and here in California, we have put together the most diverse group of human beings that's ever been assembled in history. Think about that. Look at Finland, look at Singapore. They are not diverse nations. San Diego is a diverse region, and there's strength in diversity. If you look at the history of innovation, it's based on groups coming together with different backgrounds and sharing what they know. And you have this opportunity here in San Diego. You've been a majority-minority city and region and school district for many years. California, the same thing. I hope when you look at these statistics, you'll also say that thinking edge, maybe there's a different way of organizing our schools. For one thing, if you look at the backgrounds where people are coming from Asia, from Latin America, from Hawaii, the multiracial group, you would think about how can we address culture across our schools. Kids are coming in with different culture. Can we make that part of the curriculum? I've been doing some work with the Institute for the Future based in Palo Alto. And I think Devin Fidler may be coming to give you a preview of some of that work. But here's one of the things, I don't want to steal Devin's thunder. One of the things that Institute for the Future has done is talked about moving from educational institutions to learning flows. Personalized learning flows, that idea of any pace, any place. So there's a nice map, if you want to do a little preview for what Devin's going to talk about, a nice map that they've created talking about the future of learning and moving from educational institutions, formal education, you have to go to a place, take courses, get a degree, get grades, to learning flows that any learner anywhere can assemble based on their own interests and passions. We're also talking about cities as the focal point for this. Not just the school district, but expanding it out to everything in a city, everything in a region, places where kids can learn. MacArthur Foundation in Chicago has been one of the instigators of this movement. They started with a digital media and learning program, and they quickly moved from out-of-school learning to really looking at everything in Chicago. They're based in Chicago. Again, the range of institutions, libraries, museums, after-school, youth groups, churches. And this is now a very current system of different cities, Pittsburgh, Dallas, Chicago, Washington, D.C. They're joined around the cities of learning. So this is a great example of things that you can follow along their pathways that they've trod just the past couple of years. And they've just now in Pittsburgh issued a playbook for how they brought together 200 organizations in Pittsburgh to do this work. And I bet you amongst this group, there are at least 100 different groups represented here. So here's the bottom line. Sometimes people say, well, you've got this core agenda and all these things they're talking about, and someone's saying early, education is so complicated. It's got this special language that educators talk that the rest of us don't really understand. It's really just authentic learning, 4 words and an equal sign. Let's make school life more like real life. Let's go back to an earlier age where kids knew more about how their family life related to their school life. If they were working on a farm, they knew how to raise crops. They knew how to grow things. I think every student should be able to, by the time they graduate from high school, how's this? They should be able to grow something. But believe me, there are 18-year-olds graduating from high schools in June who have never put their hands in dirt, never grown anything. When we talk about climate change, we talk about the environment, we talk about all these issues, how can we as citizens understand these issues unless we have more hands-on learning? So let me show you a short film all about school life being more like real life. It comes from a great project here in California. And the story I'm going to show you is here in San Diego. I'm often in the position of telling folks, wherever I am, there's been some great work that's going on here. You may not have known about it, but I'm here to tell you about it. This is a project called Linked Learning, linking school life to real life, multiple pathways for looking at what career you'd like to pursue. So this work was initially funded by the Irvine Foundation, and you know that name, which funds the quality of life and learning in California. And they were looking for a model for the reinvention of the California high school. And they saw different places where kids would go on a field trip to visit a workplace. They saw different places where kids were using technology to access information, maybe doing some projects together. But they didn't see a whole system where all this was brought together, and they said, we're going to have to invent it. We're going to start a new organization. It's called Connect Ed. You can see their website, Connect Ed California. And we're going to call it Linked Learning. This work began on the East Coast several decades ago when people on Wall Street, Sandy Weil actually from Citibank was one of the earliest founders of this movement, because sitting there on Wall Street and looking at those kids walking by and saying, I want those kids to have a chance to work at Citibank, but to get them to do that, I need to start in high school. So Sandy Weil started a finance academy. There's some great stories of the way in which he encouraged high school students to come and intern at Citibank and learn what we do. So that work has now come to California, and California is a leader in this work. So I'd like to show you this story from a young woman named Anna, and from San Diego, the Construction Technology Academy. So let's take a look at that.
My name is Anna Sakal, and I'm a senior, 12th grade, and I go to Construction Tech Academy. Well, I was in 10th grade when I came from either school. I didn't really go to school to learn. It was mostly just because you go to school. And just, I guess, to have fun. I didn't really have, like, any career views. I didn't think I was going to go to college. I didn't even really know a lot about college. So it was just kind of like, you know, show up to school. I was always late, always absent. And then I came here, and they didn't even want to let me in because I was like a bad student before. Well, not that I was a bad student, it's just that I didn't apply myself. And now I actually see that I've always liked learning, but like over there I didn't really care. And right here, actually, I see that there's a future for me. So I actually applied myself.
Anna came here, I think, sort of curious about construction, architecture, and engineering. And she's a true success story because she was exposed to a lot of different careers that are out there. You know, one day they might work with an electrician, the next day an electrical engineer. She's gone through the work-based experiences, even from job shadows all the way up to internships. And she's really latched onto something and became passionate about something.
All right, Anita.
Yeah.
Let me see your project. Well, what is the materials that you're using? Glass?
It's glass.
What do you use glass for?
Because I wanted to see through. It'd be like, you could, like, lighting, so we don't waste that much electricity.
I know, but I mean, when you actually have, you know, a structural element, you are supposed to actually just be able to build it. So the glass is not going to just stand by itself. You have to have some elements that are going to hold the glass. And when your expectations are low, obviously the students are not going to try to achieve. when the students actually see, well, Mr. Garcia is really picky or Mr. Garcia doesn't like this, you know, they need to see that. They really need to see that you have high expectations and you are not willing to take any less than that. Now, if you want light in that particular area,
okay.
then you can actually just have light coming through. But if you have the entire area, you know, with glass, you're gonna cook in there.
Okay. Why do we need to learn this? That was always my question. That's why I didn't bother in 9th grade. But right here, it's like, why do we need to learn this? They're actually showing us that we're gonna need these skills when we get to the real world. So they're trying to prepare us for not just college, but like careers, life after college. Not everybody goes to college, so they're just like focusing on preparing us for life after high school.
I think it's important when we do this work that we attract an industry that needs folks. They will tell you that their actions are predatory. They really want them. So we have architects, engineers, and construction folks fighting over these kids. But also it's important that we give them the rigorous college preparatory education too. You know, we're teaching the problem-solving skills, how to work in team, but they've got to have all the theory and all the academic background too, because they can leave here and not be an engineer. They could go be a doctor because you know, the skill set is the same in every career, to be part of a team, to be accountable for your work, to be a lifelong learner, and so forth.
From this point, 6 units going way up. What is the angle that I'm specifying? 90 degrees, right? The starting point, what is the starting point, Hasibi?
Everybody's afraid of failure. And I experience that with my students all the time. And always being a minority, you know, you are being pretty much raised, you know, it's like, well, I cannot do this, or, you know, but definitely being in a situation, in a program like this, where you're put to the test on a, you know, weekly basis, you're being challenged with all these projects. I think that is building confidence in all of our students. So that is a big thing, you know, that they need to build self-confidence by achieving.
And then like over here, that's one of the dentist's office, and then there's the other one, but they share the same restroom. All the work that I do here gives me a sense of pride because I know that I did it and it's difficult. But then over here is like the conference room where they have meetings and stuff. There's mostly male. It's like 25% girls, so it's kind of, because it's construction, so it's kind of a little like, where do girls, like, a girl's not going to be holding a hammer and hammering a nail into wood. So I was like, okay, this is a challenge, but I like challenges, let's go for it. And I see that the other girls here, that's what they're doing too. It's a challenge and they're going for it. I will be the first one to go to college. My mom actually, she went to high school and she didn't get to go to college. And my dad, he didn't get to go to college. So I kind of think their hopes of college are put on me. So that's why I'm working extra hard, because I know they want something better for me. I kind of grew up with my grandma, and she was the person that actually, you know, said, you can do this, don't be scared of the other people, I know they're better for me.
In the interest of time, we'll move along, but if you'd like to see the rest of this, it's on the ConnectEd California website, and they have a number of videos about the multiple pathways that kids can take. And when Irvine Foundation started this, they said, we not only want to reinvent the California high school, but we want to prepare kids for fields that California needs. This is about the future of California's economy. So there are pathways for finance, there are pathways for manufacturing, for healthcare, for digital arts, which California is the home of. One of our biggest exports are films, music, TV, movies, video games. Can kids find a pathway to that? So I give Irvine Foundation a lot of credit for investing early in this model. And then when the California economy got better, picked up, the state looked at this and said, we need to invent the California high school. What's the best model? So the investment that Irvine Foundation put into about 7 years of this work, the California Career Pathways Trust is now using $250 million of state money to do that kind of work. It's a good example of how a foundation can identify innovation, invest in it, and then the state comes along and says, well, that's what we want to do. Thank you for paving the way for us. That's what we want to move towards. I've got some other slides which I can make available to you, but I want to close with just a few words about technology and how technology is a lot more than we use it for. Here's a nice NPR report about the word gap for preschoolers. This gap in language learning starts very early. And there's a famous study, it's about 20 years old now, that documented that by the age of 3, there's a 30 million word gap between some 3-year-olds and others, just based on the words they've heard. Some 3-year-olds have heard a lot more language than other 3-year-olds. They've heard 30 million more words. Not the volume of words, but also the kinds of words. The positive versus negative utterances they're hearing from their parents and from the people that they're surrounded by. So that's nice to know, a 30 million word gap. How can we improve that? Technology is an ally. Technology was made to record and play back. That's something we're familiar with. Could we record and play back the speech that children hear? This is a small device that infants and toddlers wear, and there you see the overalls. It sits in a little pocket in their overalls, and it records everything that they hear during the day. So when their parents come home, it's like a word pedometer. It records the words, and then it sends information to the parents about, here's the amount of words and the kinds of words your kid has heard if they're in daycare or in childcare. Make sure that you read to them. Make sure that you talk to them, that you take them out and experience something. So it's a way of reminding parents about their role as educators even before their kids get to school. It's called the Lina System. And a number of, again, cities have adopted this because they say, well, if it's the future of learning, we've got to start young. Providence, Rhode Island, in this NPR report, you'll see a mention of the Providence mayor saying, we want to start a project called Providence Talks. We want our people to talk with young people and surround them with positive language. And just a few closing thoughts about the edge of time and place, because it is the centennial of the national parks coming up next year. You may have heard some of the announcements about this. Again, if you look at what makes America unique, this is something that Finland and Singapore don't have. We have 400 plus national parks that are our nation's most important, significant places. These great landscapes, the Grand Canyon and Yellowstone, also places where history happened. And maybe not just the Civil War battlefields and the Valor Park in Hawaii, but also Japanese internment camps. So we're using these sites to tell ourselves these stories. There's a great, when I was driving around the Bay Area, there's a great interview with Betty Reed Soskin, a 93-year-old oldest park ranger. A great interview. If you want to hear it, I'll send you the link. In it, she says, when the Japanese were interned during World War II, all of a sudden 70,000, I think that's the number, 70,000 Japanese Americans sent to these camps. 40,000 of them were farm workers. They knew how to grow things. They were working in the farms. We know this in the Bay Area. We know that all of a sudden you've put 40,000 farm workers into internment camps. It's time to harvest the crops. What are we going to do? Someone has the bright idea in the 1940s, let's import some workers from Mexico. That became the Bracero program that some of you are familiar with. So by telling ourselves these stories, we see how the issues we face today very much originated back decades ago. This is the history. These are the stories we want our kids to understand. And this is as true of San Diego as it is for kids around the country. You have a great national park here. And one of the great things that Cabrillo does is doing video conferences. When I mentioned that idea of having professionals talk with students, video conferences from Cabrillo, an underwater camera that kids can see what's at the Cabrillo National Park. And also the history, of course. Juan Cabrillo stepped into history as the first European to set foot on the west coast of the United States. Places of learning, the edible schoolyard, a school garden where kids learn not only to raise things but also to cook. Chef Alice Waters from Berkeley, from Chez Panisse, this is her project. School gardens are sweeping the country as places of learning where kids can go and learn about nature and grow things. Some great websites, the Google Art Project. Our kids can visit the world's greatest art museums around the world. This was not possible in the life as we had as students, to be able to go to the Van Gogh Museum in Amsterdam, to the Hermitage in St. Petersburg. It's a wonderful site. Google used their Street View project. You've seen those vehicles with the cameras running around, recording. You've looked up your address on Google Street View to see if your car's in your parking space. They took the same technology and put it on bicycles and rode them up and down the world's greatest art museums and given this great gift to our students, really to everyone. The largest edge of young people who can do so much more, as I mentioned with Sesame Street, kids can learn so much more. Can kids organize their own learning? This is an independent project from Western Massachusetts. Kids took the responsibility for organizing a semester of their own learning. My last question, what's the great definition of a great learning center? Think about that. How would you identify a great children's museum or a great school? The key to your answer is to make it short and make it measurable. I was asked this question by the Superintendent's Association director in Washington, D.C. He said, I've seen your website. There's great stuff on there. You're chronicling these wonderful schools. How would you define a great school? And could you make it short? How about a sentence or two? Not a whole page or 5 pages. In education, we're quite verbal, you know. We're just getting going at about a couple thousand words. How would you measure that? And I said, well, you know, a great school, when you walk in, you feel it immediately in the first 5 or 10 minutes. It's the school climate, the school culture. Often the students take you on the tour, not the principal, because what matters is what the students know and can do. They're doing project-based learning. They're not just reading out of a textbook. They're working together in teams like the modern workplace. And Paul Houston, the head of this superintendent's group, said, well, that's getting a bit long. How would you measure that? And I said, wow, measurement. Well, we need to do so much more. We got to change the tests, assessment. We need to make more progress on that. Tests don't measure everything that students know. He said, okay. Here is what Paul Houston said was his definition of a great learning environment. That's it. Do the kids run in at the same rate that they run out? That's it. We could have measured this under No Child Left Behind and saved ourselves a lot of time and money. When you think about this, what this means, and I'm sure it's true of this children's museum, kids are eager to get there. They know there's going to be something fun and engaging to do. They have some freedom, some flexibility over what they can do in that place. And then when it's time to go, they're a little slow to leave. They're saying, I'm really enjoying, I'm having fun doing this. That's what we want from our schools. That's what we want from our libraries, our youth development groups. And a lot of this kind of learning happens outside the school right now. We want to reinvent the school to encourage more of this kind of learning. So thank you very much, and I guess we'll have some conversation.